Good afternoon. As the rector of St. Paul's College and the chairperson of the board of directors of the Arthur V. Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice at St. Paul's College here at the University of Manitoba, I welcome you all to the MLT Aikins University Affiliation Lecture. Before we begin, and as we have commenced each day, as well as our keynote addresses at this symposium, I'm going to be giving a land acknowledgement. St. Paul's College, the University of Manitoba, and our city of Winnipeg sit at the crossroads of the Anishinaabe, Métis, Cree, Dakota, and Oji-Cree nations. We acknowledge specifically that we are in Treaty 1 territory and on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are committed to the pathways of reconciliation, and we hope you will join us in these endeavors. This is the 15th year anniversary for the St. Paul's College University Affiliation Lecture. This lecture series brings together those in the fields of peace and conflict studies and related disciplines to share ideas and pursue relationships that further this field of study and research. The lecture series provides an open public forum for ideas and conversation. I want to express our deep gratitude for our sponsors and partners. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Sean Byrne, the past director and co-founder of the Morrow Institute, for his leadership regarding this lecture series. We also thank Dr. Charlotte Enns, who is the director of the Morrow Institute, and also Dr. Adam Muller, who's here today, the director of the Peace and Conflict Studies program, for the continuing support of the PACS program in the furtherance of this lecture. We also acknowledge the ongoing funding support of the law firm, MLT Aikins, for this lecture series. This well-regarded Western Canadian law firm has been a longtime supporter of the Morrow Institute's activities and a founding sponsor of this lecture series. I want to recognize the continued support of the University of Manitoba for St. Paul's College, the Morrow Institute, and this lecture series. The University of Manitoba's 5-year strategic plan calls us to forge connections, quote, forge connections that foster high impact community engagement, both locally and internationally, unquote. We know this lecture series is helping to build local and international relationships both now and in the future. Finally, I would like to thank the Ayotte brothers, Brian and Jed, for helping us launch this Prairie Symposium for the common good. And this is our first annual symposium of this nature. So it is fitting that this year, the Morrow Institute for Peace and Justice and the Jesuit Centre for Catholic Studies came together to include this lecture in this Prairie Symposium for the common good. I would now like to invite Dr. Adam Muller, the director of the Peace and Conflict Studies program, to introduce our honored guest speaker, Dr. Heather Eaton from St. Paul University in Ottawa, who will give our 2022 lecture. Over to you, Adam.
Thanks very much, Chris. Hello, everybody. Greetings from the Peace and Conflict Studies graduate programs at the University of Manitoba. It's my great pleasure to be with you here today to moderate the 2022 MLT Aikins St. Paul's College University Affiliation Lecture. My thanks to all concerned at the Morrow Institute and MLT Aikins and St. Paul's College for making today's lecture possible. I'd now like to formally welcome Dr. Heather Eaton. Dr. Eaton is an interdisciplinary scholar whose research and activism brings together ideas and arguments from the fields of ecology, feminism, and theology. She has been particularly engaged with ecological, feminist, and liberation theologies, with the relation between religion and science, and with interreligious responses to ecological crises. Dr. Eaton's books include Advancing Nonviolence and Social Transformation, New Perspectives on Nonviolent Theories, with Lauren Levesque, that's 2016. The Intellectual Journey of Thomas Berry, Imagining the Earth Community, from 2014. Ecological Awareness, Exploring Religion, Ethics, and Aesthetics, with Sigurd Bergman, from 2011. Introducing Ecofeminist Theologies, from 2005. And Ecofeminism and Globalization, Exploring Religion, Culture, and Context, from 2003, with Lois Ann Lorenzen. She has, of course, written too many articles to cover in this brief introduction. Dr. Eaton serves as a board member of Worldviews, Global Religions, Environment, and Culture of the Religion and Ecology session of the American Academy of Religion, and she is past president of the Canadian Theological Society. Her most recent work focuses on peace and conflict studies, approaches to gender, ecology, and religion, on animal rights, and on nonviolence, and as well as the topic of today's lecture, which is wonder. I'd like to now turn things over to you, Dr. Eaton. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Mueller. And thank you to all the organizers of this excellent symposium. It's been a very interesting 2 days. To the presenters and the participants for the meaningful and inspiring conversations. I'm just going to let you all know that I am not doing a PowerPoint. So you are free to go get yourselves a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, or if you're in the right time zone, perhaps a glass of wine. I'm going to begin with a poem because we live in difficult times. There's no author to this poem that I know of. This, my dear, is the greatest challenge. The greatest challenge of being alive, to witness the injustices of this world and not allow it to consume our light. Just a small note about my background. I grew up on Lake Huron in Ontario. I spent 7 years in L'Arche. I did an MDiv. I did a PhD, as Dr. Mueller mentioned. I studied liberation theology in Peru with Gustavo Gutierrez. I did a PhD on Thomas Berry and ecofeminism. And I worked more recently in nonviolence, animal rights, on beauty and wonder. So these realities influence my thoughts and my values and my comments. And my presentation is divided into 3 sections. The first addresses the common good, the second addresses spirituality, and the third, wonder. So when we refer to the term the common good, it's actually a political philosophical term, and it has a very long history. From Aristotle, who talked about common public interests and public and shared goods, to what we have today, which is more a family of concepts. The common good is not a utilitarian concept, it's a moral obligation. And it affirms that we live in relationships of all kinds, and that these relationships are the foundations and structures of our societies. The common good emphasizes public over private, common interests over personal desires, and the social fabric over individualism. The common good expanded today is to include the natural world. Now, this can be done in different ways, from better resource management, water, food systems, forestry, and biodiversity, to understanding ourselves as part of a larger Earth community. The Faith for Earth initiative, which is a part of the United Nations Environment Program, works with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and they use the language of the common good across religious and cultural traditions. And they are also about cooperating for sustainability and peace. Laudato Si, which has been mentioned many times over the past couple of days, integral ecology, Earth as common good, and care for our common home. In Laudato Si, there is mention of ecological conversion, and I want to just problematize this a little bit to say it has many meanings and levels. One that I think is important, if we're talking about ecological conversion, is to develop ecological literacy, meaning studying the dynamics of the natural world and how we are embedded in and related to so many elements of the natural world. There are endless relationships that would indicate the common good is much larger and more complex and far more interrelated and entangled than we have previously thought. That we are ecologically embedded citizens of an Earth community. We emerged from, we are sustained by, and we belong to this Earth community. Studying evolution, in addition to ecological literacy, also reveals unfathomable interconnections and relations, further entanglements with this Earth community. And this is the greater common good. To mention evolution, I'm saying evolution is not an idea, and it's not an ideological claim. It's a scientific reality, and John McCarthy mentioned this yesterday. We emerged from and are embedded in Earth dynamics, and John McCarthy spoke about the evolution of life structures. Now, what is a bit startling in our time is that most people need to learn ecological literacy and learn about evolution. And both of these are the fundamental facts about the expansion of life, of emerging complexities, and human development. Ecological and evolutionary literacy reveals the most significant dynamics and patterns and energies within which we live and are nourished. We only exist within a complex Earth community. For those of you who study new materialism, this is a field, these new materialism studies have revealed countless levels of interconnections and relationships and embeddedness. Now, as mentioned several times in the past few days, this worldview of interconnectedness is not the operative worldview in post-industrial societies. Anthropocentrism is the governing worldview here and in most places in the industrialized world. But when we talk about the common good, and when we include an ecological conversion or integral ecology, it's very clear that the lack of ecological and evolutionary literacy is hampering effective responses. One of the projects that I and some of you here have been involved in is the Journey of the Universe, a very important and multifaceted contribution. It has been inspired by Thomas Berry, also who has been mentioned here, and I quote from Thomas Berry: "The natural world is the larger sacred community to which we belong. To become alienated from this community is to become destitute in all that makes us human. To damage this community is to diminish our own existence." End quote. Sometimes when ecological literacy and evolutionary perspectives or cosmological perspectives are mentioned, some see these as concerns that ignore social injustices and the dire daily struggles of many people. It's true that to integrate evolution and ecological literacy does not directly respond to all concerns, such as violence and interlocking mechanisms of social injustices. However, it does educate us about our embeddedness in the natural world. It inspires. It teaches us that we need to live with Earth on Earth's terms. Therefore, it reforms and informs our visions and plans. Ecological literacy and evolution challenges the domination of the Earth. And it indicates that domination is not the regular biological form of relationships. Mutual flourishing is. So I suggest that an ecologically sustainable future in this notion of expanded common good requires an evolutionary view to develop a sufficient awareness of the Earth community and to grasp our embeddedness, as Dr. Senecki said yesterday. And this will allow for a planetary and not just a human solidarity, or peace with the Earth, or an ecological culture, as says Laudato Si. The Earth community is the basis, the foundation of the common good, of our belonging, of integral ecology, of common ground and common good. And this is a radical worldview shift to understand and integrate ecological and evolutionary literacy into our studies and worldviews. And Dr. Denton explained this yesterday when he was mentioning Thomas Berry's The Great Work. And ecological worldviews are emerging in the Earth Charter, in the work related to John Cobb's work on ecological civilizations, as mentioned, the Journey of the Universe, or the Cochabamba Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, or Vandana Shiva's Democracy for Life, and as Dr. Vanin mentioned yesterday, the Insights from Indigenous Wisdom. These and other initiatives promote ecological democracy, earth justice, peace, and signal that a worldview shifts, they are occurring. To me, this is very necessary and urgent if we want any kind of sustainable future. This ecological understanding of the common good is robust. It's political, it's practical, it's evidence-based, and it's inspiring. We see ourselves as belonging to a greater whole, which gives an orientation to our worldviews and our actions. I'm going to shift now to the second section, which is on spirituality. So what is spirituality? It's a very popular term. I'm spiritual but not religious. You can go to the spa and have a spiritual experience. Whatever is calming and comforting passes as spirituality. I have to say that I am old school when it comes to spirituality and religious experience. Spirituality to me emerges from the religious impulse. It's not the institution, it's not the dogma. You can't, in fact, teach spirituality. You have to experience it. As Rudolf Otto beautifully talked about, you have to encounter the numinous or the mysterium tremendum. Or you have to have an I-thou relationship with something larger than the self. Spirituality involves an encounter, an awareness, a belonging, an awakening. It acknowledges the self, but situates us in larger dimensions of reality. So when I say spirituality, I'm speaking of these profound depths of human experience. Spiritualities come from the realm of insights rather than data or knowledge. Spirituality is like breathing. It's as intimate and as vital as breath. We heard today about rua and the meaning of rua. The Latin word inspirare is the origin of our word spirituality, which means to breathe or breathe into. Teilhard de Chardin, recognized Jesuit, talked about spirituality as a zest for life. It's a desire for life. It's the ability to feel wonder and awe. And it's the ability to experience reverence in the face of the immensity and elegance of existence. Spiritualities are teachers of consciousness. To develop a spiritual consciousness is often described as moving from death to life, from sleep to awake, from illusion to enlightenment, from confinement to liberation, or from confusion to clarity. There is nothing superficial about spirituality. It requires attentiveness, depth, clarity, listening, and waiting. My view, spirituality is not escapism. While it's deeply personal, it's not individualistic, and it's not about the quiet, peaceful moments. It's a capacity, like physical or intellectual or emotional capacities, and it has to be developed and educated and attended to. Spiritualities require that we cultivate interiority, radical openness, the ability to face uncertainties, and to stand in front of the immense mysteries. I love the term of Gaston Bachelard, who says, we are surrounded with intimate immensities. Spirituality requires a willingness that our reference points will change, that we will be transformed. Spiritual practices train the mind and the spirit to awaken and to perceive that which is not readily visible, to see layers of reality that are not immediately apparent, that there are depths to existence, to our own interiorities, and also to the vastness of the cosmos. As of today, there are considered to be 2 trillion galaxies. So we're barely aware of these dimensions of existence. Spirituality strengthens respect. It orients personal and social ethics. And if spirituality is associated with the natural world, it informs our ecological ethics. I would say spirituality evokes reverence and then responsibility. Spirituality inspires. It's experienced, it's practiced, it's a discipline. It comes from the depth experiences of immanence and transcendence. So again, spirituality educates, it informs, it awakens, it orients, and it grounds us in layers of reality. If we ask what are the sources of spirituality, well, we could say God or divine powers. I'm going to say we need to think a little bit more carefully about what those mean. So if we take evolution seriously, as I mentioned in The Common Good, and as did Teilhard de Chardin, just for the Jesuits here, he's a good Jesuit, then we see that spirituality is embedded in the processes of the earth community. Or as John Hott says, the earth is not just our home, it's our source. Which means the source of spirituality is embedded and immanent and present. I'm going to quote again from Thomas Berry. Religions are not the source of spiritual depth. It's the earth processes. Our spirituality is earth derived. If there is no spirituality in the earth, then there is no spirituality in ourselves. The human and the earth are totally implicated in each other. So what does this mean? It means that our spiritual sensibilities are derived from and dependent upon a flourishing earth. It is the lushness, the diversity, and the elegance, and the challenges of earth life that create the conditions for the potent sensibilities we call spiritual. Thus, as the earth diminishes, so will our spiritual capabilities and awareness. This goes farther than all of the work that's been done on care for creation, which of course is very good and important. Or even what eco-theologian Norm Habel writes, to violate the earth is to tear God's mask, to scar God's physical face, to desecrate God's earthly dwelling. This is often a question of ethics. I just want to shift beyond ethics, and I'm going to read the axiom of Gestuenuth Salut, who is the Salish elder from Vancouver Island, who many of us know as Chief Dan George. He writes, "We are as much alive as we keep the earth alive." And from Barry, "A diminished earth will dull our spiritual sensibilities and awareness. Our horizons will shrink, our inner lives will wither, and spirituality will expire. So integral is our inner world with the outer world that if this outer world is damaged, then the inner life of our souls is diminished proportionately. When we so ruthlessly extinguish the life forms of our era, we threaten, along with those planetary beings, the inner life of the human." I think this is a transformation of our religious orientations to nurture a deep ecological spirituality. Gus Speth, who was mentioned yesterday, also summarizes the point. He says, Gus Speth was a scientist, by the way, a forester. He says, "I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation." That's quite a profound insight from a forester. So a spiritual vision adequate for our ecological era requires that we awaken to the earth community. I'm going to move to the third part on wonder. Academics, which are most of us here, intellectuals and social commentators, are trained to critique. We can debunk beliefs, powers, and illusions. We have many epistemological tools of skepticism and discernment and well-reasoned arguments and honed intellectual skills. And social justice activists join in the chorus of critiques and expose injustices and denounce crimes and criminals and speak truth to power. When we do this as a predominant activity, we may become no more than what Bruno Latour calls the routine patrol of the critical barbarians. He wrote a very interesting essay called Why Has Critique Run Out of Steam? And this is a bit the basis of what I'm presenting today, is that critique has its place, but it's not the only way. It's not the only way to learn, to have depth, and to have awareness and insight. We know that the Euro-Western realms are in a postmodern muddle, no meta-narratives, multiple narratives and truths. While much of this is liberatory, it has also opened the space for post-factual politics, post-truth, and the fake news tropes. And these have in turn fostered a potent anti-intellectual shift. I think as people involved in universities, we need to take that very seriously. Obviously, analysis and critique are essential for social transformation. We require these to develop ethical positions, to strengthen our moral outrage, and to have courage for effective resistance. However, they can become a habit of mind that inhibits other modes of knowing, such as experiencing beauty and wonder. I'm going to quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel. What we cannot comprehend by analysis, we become aware of in awe. So my focus is on how wonder teaches, inspires, nurtures hope, offers courage and energy. Rachel Carson considered wonder to be crucial to understanding Earth life. She reflected and wrote a great deal about wonder. She spent hours studying tidal pools and crabs and communing with the earth at night. Rachel Carson was a scientist, and yet she experienced the natural world as holding mysteries and depth that the human mind and spirit could intuit, but not dissect. Kathleen Dean Moore writes, "A person with a sense of wonder marvels at the redwood's trunk, at a fern's fiddlehead, as if seeing it for the first time again and again, and hears it as if she's never heard the song of the winter wren. Wonder is the opposite of boredom, indifference, and exhaustion," end quote. Again, Abraham Joshua Heschel, he writes that wonder is related to radical amazement. He writes, "Wonder is a state of mind in which nothing is taken for granted. Each thing is a surprise. Being is unbelievable. We are amazed, amazed beyond words, and all sight is suddenness," end quote. So wonder implies being open, curious, and responsive. Again, from Dean Moore, "A sense of wonder is an attitude of openness, of receptivity that leads a person from a preoccupation with the self into a search for meaning beyond oneself." These insights to me are very important. We note the shift from feeling amazement to becoming aware of realms greater than the self, to seek larger meanings of horizons outside the normal routine of preoccupations. There are ineffable and compelling and wondrous realms to the Earth community, and we can become attentive to these quietly, courteously, and receptively. And yet it's the natural world that elicits this response. Again, Dean Moore. The sudden beauty, the intricate interrelations, the power, the contingency, the ingenuity, the stunning fact of Earth, and most importantly, its ultimate mystery. So it's my view that experiences of wonder and awe need to be cultivated alongside of spirituality, integrated and taken most seriously within the spectrum of human experiences for an ecologically demanding era. Again, wonder, it's not escapist, it's not privileged, it's not a luxury or an extra. Countless times people notice a glorious sunset, they appreciate it, and then they return to the real work of dissecting and analyzing, scrutinizing theories, evaluating and judging. Experiencing beauty is considered nice, but not relevant to social change or climate justice or factual considerations. And I think this is very incorrect. Experiencing beauty and wonder and spirituality are integral to human knowing, well-being, and ethical optics. Wonder expands and informs ethics. However, it's ignored as incidental, soft knowledge, too subjective, not transferable, barely fathomable, and it deteriorates under critique. And yet, wonder is a robust human experience that enlightens and transforms the human spirit. Primarily, wonder is a capacity. It's the ability to ponder that every leaf on every tree is unique. Just pause and ponder that. For millennia, every leaf on every tree has been unique. Wonder is a capacity to sense the presence of trees, to marvel at bird songs, that grass is alive with communities of beings, that acorns turn into trees, that elephants mourn, that dolphins play, and that whales communicate over vast distances. Wonder awakens. It's an invitation to an awakening. To awaken to the natural world is to see beauty and complexity, vitality, and the breadth and depth of the Earth community. Wonder allows for liminal experiences. It's a threshold to gain insights only gained through experiences of wonder. In this way, the natural world becomes revelatory, numinous, ineffable, and for some sacred. Such experiences of wonder are transformative. They increase our awareness, they expand our interiority, they provide insights, they reconstruct our knowledge, and they rouse responsibility. Wonder educates. And wonder changes our reference points. Wonder strengthens the realizations that our anthropocentrism is flawed and that we are not the center or the main reference points or the key player or even the chief concern of the biosphere. And we are not the center of the grand drama of the universe. Wonder transforms. I might suggest, or at least offer to you for your consideration, wonder transforms more effectively than only analysis and critique. One does not need to be convinced of the potency of wonder. Such experiences are powerful, and yet I think they require reflection and cultivation, because the importance of wonder needs to be affirmed. Wonder is not superficial. It's not simply a lovely experience. Wonder and awe educates our spiritual sensibilities, our mind, and our ethics. Wonder and awe lead to an appreciation and reverence leads to responsibilities. Such values and virtues, in my view, are desperately needed today. Again, a quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel. Humankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. The beginning of our happiness lies in the understanding that this life without wonder is not worth living. What we lack is not a will to believe, but a will to wonder. There are some very interesting contemporary investigations and research about wonder. Numerous research from distinct disciplines are studying wonder and awe. Dasher Keltner, who's a psychologist and the founding director of the Greater Good Science Center in California, he researches wonder. He finds that wonder transforms people. Those who experience wonder are more likely to define themselves as a member of a culture, a species, or a moral cause. They see themselves as belonging, and it embeds people, an individual self, with a social identity. They also found at the Greater Good Science Center that experiencing wonder and awe makes people more inclined to help someone in need and feel less entitled and less self-important. They're also studying what they call an awe-altruism link. And they're saying that when people have this, what they're calling this awe-altruism link, they become more modest, less narcissistic, and one who is able to demonstrate greater kindness towards others. Other studies find that wonder leads people to cooperate, to share resources, and even to sacrifice for others. They talk about this as increase in pro-social peaceful behavior. Some are suggesting that awe and wonder strengthens an immune response. Some other scientists are saying we need to talk about awe deprivation disorder. When there's an awe deprivation disorder, it can lead to mental and physical health concerns, very similar to nature deficit disorder. From another angle, recent research, and this is from what's called the Lab of Misfits, and no, I am not making that up, the Lab of Misfits, directed by neuroscientist Bruno Latour. He also studies wonder, and he says that we are wired for wonder. And using EEG headsets, he says that awe intuits a pattern of activity, or what he calls the signature of awe. He also finds that after experiences of wonder, people are emotionally uplifted. They're more generous. They're more able to tolerate differences and feel more connected with others. People become more empathic, more courageous, more risk tolerant, and are able to take a step into the unknown. Another example comes from Sean Gallagher, who published a book called The Neurophenomenology of Awe and Wonder Towards a Non-Reductionist Cognitive Science. And one of the key studies was to explore the inner experiences of wonder from astronauts who contemplated Earth from space. So they interviewed as many astronauts as possible who saw the Earth from space. And they found that the overwhelming experience was how the beauty of the Earth moved them to want to protect it. They perceived the Earth as alive, fragile, of unlimited beauty, and infinitely precious. And the final example comes from a biologist, Andreas Weber, who writes about poetic ecology. In a book called The Biology of Wonder, Aliveness, Feeling, and the Metamorphosis of Science. This is a beautiful book that shows how science needs to expand its method in how they study life. And he says that life needs to be approached from the mind and the heart. And he says that what we call feelings or emotions or insights, intuitions, these are the foundation of all life. And he does this by demonstrating that feelings, as they're called, are actually an interior reality to all organisms and in each cell. Emotions, sentient systems, the desire for life, interiority, and subjectivity, these are the organizing principles of life and the biosphere. and wonder is a connective tissue that allows us to see and feel and understand and appreciate and protect. Wonder is an antidote to despair. So wonder is not the goal, it's the source. So to conclude, it's easy to be preoccupied with political machinations. They are compelling and they are disturbing and they are engaging and they're important. But they're not the only dimension of reality. An emphasis on experiencing the natural world, in reveling in beauty, it's often considered lovely but extraneous. It's like being momentarily refreshed by Mary Oliver's exquisite poems. And yet it is deep spiritual experiences of wonder that can bring joy and inspiration, hope, gratitude, and energy. And these are not trivial, and these are so needed today. So my contributions to our conversations are to expand the notion of the common good with ecological and evolutionary literacy, to reconsider spirituality and wonder with a more robust analysis, and to see these as foundational and fundamental human capacities. This is integral ecology. This is a way forward in hard times. And I'm going to end with Rachel Carson. She wrote a very little piece called The Exceeding Beauty of the Earth. And she says, when people contemplate the natural world, they find calmness and courage, and they've been steadied and reassured. And I'll end with a quote from Rachel Carson. The more clearly we can focus our attention on wonder and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we will have for its destruction. Thank you. Bit short, but sorry.
Gee, that was wonderful.
I can do it all again more slowly.
Not at all necessary. You see, you don't need to speak for a long time if what you say is so contentful. So thank you very much, Dr. Eaton. That was a remarkably rich and generative presentation. And we're about to transition to a Q&A portion of your lecture, where we will get to see some comments from people and engage in a wider discussion. But I wanted to thank you particularly for two things. One, very clearly making the point that we're ecologically embedded citizens of a world community, and then kind of unfolding those terms so that we understand the kind of depth of the mutual implication of human beings in the natural world, which is an argument against anthropocentrism, right? And I think that's just, it's terrifically well formulated in the talk that you've just given. But personally, specifically, I wanted to thank you for putting wonder back on the table. I wasn't aware of that larger literature that you're talking about.
Fascinating, isn't it?
It's absolutely fascinating, and it dovetails partly with my own experience of trying to explain to students that I think the cardinal intellectual virtue is humility. Why? Because you have to, in some sense, be open to new ideas in order to learn things. If you already just think you've already arrived, then you can't learn anything. But I think there's a deep connection between wonder and humility in this regard, in that both are sort of self-displacing, I think, in a kind of powerful way. So I'm giving people a second to put their questions together, and I'll explain how to get those questions to me in a moment. But I really, yeah, just a fabulous, fabulous set of remarks. So I'm assuming other people have questions and comments they'd like to make. We have essentially three ways of getting your thoughts on the table and into discussion. We have in the Zoom menu, we have a Q&A box, and attendees are welcome to use the Q&A box. Everybody can use the chat function, which is maybe something people are a little more familiar with. And so please just enter any thoughts or questions into the chat box. And other panelists, and I see that there are 15 attending today, they're also welcome to speak. So please, by all means, raise a hand if you're a panelist. Otherwise, put questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we can begin to get the conversation rolling. I have questions myself, but I will not hog the floor. So please, by all means. Dan.
Dr. Eaton, thank you very much. That's just wonderful. I take your point, which is a very good one, which is we don't want to like squeeze the life out of wonder by analyzing or critiquing, you know, the nature of our analysis. But being that maybe we're on these university campuses, I'm wondering, like, of course, there's a danger in kind of structuring our experience of awe too much, but we also kind of want to fit it into the work that we do in university, maybe in classroom or something like that. I wonder if you have any thoughts on like what that would look like. You know, it's hard to say teaching awe, but you know what I mean.
So my own interest is maintaining the intellectual integrity of topics such as spirituality and wonder, both of which they don't fall apart under scrutiny, but I think we miss the depth of the experience when it's not the analytic part, it's reducing them to some kind of formulaic. So I don't know if this is helpful to you, Dr. Mueller, but sometimes when I'm teaching spirituality, I will hand out a sheet of music and I'll ask people what their experience is of the notes. And you can imagine what that would be. And then I'll play the music. And then I'll ask them what their experience is of listening to the music. And I try to explain this as what we can study in the university is the notes, but they actually refer to these depth experiences, experience of music, which if you actually start analyzing the experience of music, you can see what that, you know, it breaks down. And so I think there is a structure to spirituality, and I think there is a structure to these experiences of wonder. I think they actually are analyzable, but you can't evoke them. People have to have some experiences of wonder in order to refer to the analytic dimension. Now, I have never met anyone who has not had an experience of wonder. I've just never met someone, but they might not consider it significant. I find that more common, that people don't consider their experiences of wonder significant. And on a similar note, in the years I taught theology, I occasionally had some very right-wing students who would constantly quote scripture and dogma and church teachings. And then if I said to them, well, where exactly do you experience the divine? And 99% of them would say, oh, walking on the beach, looking at the stars. So there's these disconnects between our dogmatic belief systems and the experiential foundations, what I would call the religious impulse. And I have to say, I do think theology neglects this religious impulse and these spiritualities and wonder as, it's not that it's not relevant, it's just very difficult to quantify. And my own interest is the experiences of the natural world the experiences of connecting spirituality with the natural world are in fact the oldest religious impulse in humans. There's a book, Religion and the Art of Seeing by John Dixon, and he talks about the initial development of spirituality was represented with earth art. And I think we forget this. We don't know how to think about it intellectually. And sometimes I worry theology gets very reductionist. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm not a fan of taking students. I mean, many of my colleagues will take students outside and try to elicit experiences of wonder. I personally rarely do that. But some would say that's the best way to educate, both spirituality, wonder, theology, ecology. But I do think that this experience should be attended to. And it's far more potent than I think we as intellectuals pay attention to.
I believe there's a question that Jason.
No, it's just a comment, and then there's a question in the Q&A and a comment. This is a comment coming from an undergrad student, I believe, from the University of Manitoba, and Dr. certain doctors can think bonus marks here, but nice of an undergrad student to join us. And just first time at a lecture like this, so I was nervous to join in, but I wanted to say thank you for sharing this discussion. Didn't think I would understand, but you explained everything so well, and the examples and writings were really engaging. So very nice to have Hannah with us today, an undergraduate student.
Hannah.
Yeah. And a question from the presentation, from the Q&A box. Deanne and Bill write that they loved the presentation. What books would you particularly recommend to the ordinary person about the importance of cultivating wonder?
Rabbi Heschel wrote a beautiful book called I Asked for Wonder. And Rachel Carson has a book. Some of you probably remember the title. I can't at the moment. It's got wonder in the title, A Sense of Wonder, perhaps. Diane Dean Moores wrote an article. Hang on one sec, I'll get you the reference. She wrote an article. It's got a funny title, but it's a great article. And it's called The Truth of the Barnacles. And it was in Environmental Ethics Fall 2005. The Truth of the Barnacles. Rachel Carson and the Moral Significance of Wonder. Oh yeah, Rachel Carson's book, A Sense of Wonder. You know, wonder is a very, very old philosophical tradition, philosophical and spiritual tradition. It's not, Aristotle wrote about wonder, and he wrote about the importance of wonder, and Plato disagreed with Aristotle about wonder, so they had this debate about whether it was relevant. And then by the time we get to Francis Bacon, considerably later, he said wonder is a wasted human energy and emotion. And it kind of dropped off as a significant moral, spiritual, human development element. I have to think about a really good book. Got to think about that. Not sure.
And just quickly to note that Audrey has put in the title of Carson into the chat. So thank you, Audrey. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Eaton, I'm going to just jump ahead while folks get, because I had a question, because you used the term that I hadn't heard before, and I think it makes tons of sense, but I was wondering if you could maybe say a little bit more about it, because it was completely new to me. You talked about ecological democracy, and I'm used to people talking about stewardship, right? Which is the anthropological version of that, may, or anthropocentric version of that, maybe a little bit, but could you just talk more about ecological democracy, please, and say a bit more about what it is?
So there are significant worldview shifts taking place with some activists, certainly some academics. So if you think about stewardship or care for creation, they tend to keep the human natural world divide intact. And then the other kinds of efforts, so I'm thinking about the rights of Mother Earth, the Earth Charter, the Cochabamba Declaration, the work on ecological civilizations, and then the work of ecological democracy. It's trying to say that the nation state is not the most significant dimension of, I mean, it's a political category, but it's not an ecological category. So the idea is to say we have to understand ourselves as embedded in and belonging to the natural world, that we are in communities, ecological communities. And Vandana Shiva is one of the people who talks about ecological democracy, but she's certainly not the only one. John Cobb talks about ecological civilizations, sustainable democracy. There's all kinds of other terms, but the point of them is to say we have to see ourselves as not belonging to nation states, that our first identity is belonging to an earth community, and that we have to be extremely aware that we don't have the right to push species to extinction, to destroy the mammals, which, you know, the UN is, all the large mammals will be gone in less than 10 years. This is, in my view, an ecological sin, to use the term of Patriarch Bartholomew, of colossal proportions, colossal proportions. So how do we, it's not about a naive relationship with the natural world that will never be destructive and will never, you know, that all beings can thrive equally in this democracy. That is not going to be the case, but that we have to stop seeing ourselves as the master and commander of the planet, because anyone who's paid attention to COVID, which I'm assuming all of us, knows that viruses can run the world. Viruses can change the world. And so ecological democracy and all of these other efforts, of which the Earth Charter used the term ecological democracy as well, is to say we have to see ourselves as belonging to a planet. We're a part of a biosphere. So those are some of the ways that ecological democracy gets articulated.
I really appreciate that. That's helpful. I mean, and partly it just explains that we need to think about the natural world is not out there, but importantly,
Yeah.
what is in here, right?
We're in it.
We're in
We
it.
emerged from it. We belong to it.
Yeah.
And again, I know there's a quick question, but people don't understand evolution. And I must say, very little tolerance for the idea that creationism is a scientific concept, because it's not. But evolution is a scientific concept. And I really appreciated what Dr. McCarthy talked about yesterday about, you know, we have to take evolution seriously. We must become literate about evolution. And then we can start to see this ecological democracy. We start to see that we are in a vibrant, dynamic, interrelated biosphere.
Just a quick comment from a question from the chat, and then I'll move to Mother Prioress Noella Marcelino. But Veronica writes, and thanks, Heather, for the thoughtful and energizing presentation. Will your paper be available after these sessions? And by that, I think she means what you've presented today. And if not, where will you publish it? Is this something that you might be publishing? I can say, before perhaps you answer that, that this lecture is being recorded and will be available on the Morrow Institute's YouTube channel after next week, so that it will be viewable again.
I have published parts of this, but I haven't published together anything that connects spirituality and wonder and common good. And I only have speaking notes, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Well, your lecture will live on, and we'll go from there. I invite Mother Prioress Noella Marcelino from last night's Hanley lectures to join us and turn on her microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eaton. I'm like that other person who wrote, there was so much that you gave us. I was just taking copious notes and look forward to reading your lecture. But I couldn't help but respond when you mentioned having the humility to see our place in creation and before God. And there is this beautiful section in the Life and Miracles of Saint Benedict, written by Pope Saint Gregory the Great, where he describes that Saint Benedict, before he died, saw the whole world in a ray of light. And that's something we as Benedictines find very important, because we want to have this comprehensive view, seeing the whole world in one ray. And Cardinal Basil Hume wrote about that. And if I could just share it with you, because I feel it relates very much to what you were saying. And he wrote about the vision, and he said, I wonder what it was that Saint Benedict saw as he looked out at night from his room in the tower. As Saint Gregory describes it, and the whole world had seemed as if gathered into one sunbeam and brought thus before his eyes. To a soul that sees the Creator, all creation becomes small. Though it see but a glimpse of the light of the Creator, all that is created becomes little in its eyes. And then he said, once, Cardinal Hume adds, once we have achieved but a glimpse of the glory of God, we can see the world, its people and events in their true perspective. That is, as they truly are. So I just find in that simple description written so long ago of that, getting that perspective of how small we are when we glimpse something as wondrous as what you describe, as what a scientist sees also. It puts you in your place.
Thank you. It reduces in our imagination our importance, but it doesn't diminish our importance. We are a self-conscious element of the Earth community, and our minds are able to transcend and even imagine that there are 2 trillion galaxies. I mean, our minds can expand our awareness. I think the difficulty is we then make ourselves the center of the story, and we're not the center of the story. We're part of the story.
Yes.
We're part of the reality. And so it's humility, but it's not, it makes us humble, but it doesn't degrade us in any way. It just makes us more humble and more aware that we belong to larger realities. And if there is a spiritual quest that's real, that's the basis of it, to see we belong to larger realities. Anyway, I liked your
Yes, and I absolutely agree that humility is not degrading in any
Yeah.
way.
yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
So we have a question from the Q&A from a professor here at the college, Tom Naismith. Thank you, Dr. Eaton, for a valuable talk. I welcome your concern to make room for wonder within a critical outlook on existence. But do you slip from this balance in your complaint that the post-truth fake news time we live in is a result of critique run amok? Is it not rather a critical mindset?
Oh, that's a good question. No, it's not critique run amok. I think it's very complex of how we ended up in this post-truth world, which in my view is extremely dangerous. I think Lyotard's the end of meta-narratives or the end of modernity and the meta-narratives was a necessary deconstruction of hegemonic narratives. However, what it opened the door to was if any of you teach, many of you teach students, if you can believe the moon is made of green cheese, and you can believe it's true. And you have to say to students, you can believe that, but it isn't true. And I think the conversation about truth has become very, very difficult. And I don't think that's the fault of critique. I think that's an inability for us to actually teach critical thinking skills, discerning skills. How do we make a position? And, if you think about he who must not be named in the United States, how can they talk about alternative truths? Alternative facts. And this just becomes the norm. And, we used to talk about political spin, but now if you think of what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, misinformation is part of that conflict. So I think it's really difficult in our era. It's not about the lack of critical thinking skills. We're using them today. We're talking about wonder and spirituality, but with critical thinking skills, it's more that analyzing the ecological crisis is one step. Falling in love with the earth is another step. And they're both needed. And I don't know what to make of this post-truth alternative fact world we're in. I find it extremely difficult. I don't know, did you have an opinion? Does anybody else have an opinion on that? I'd be interested in hearing, because it makes intellectual work extremely difficult. And opinions aren't facts, and beliefs are not necessarily based in reality. They're beliefs. We can believe all kinds of things, but what is the role of the intellect in human development? What is the role of the university if it's not to develop skills to discern what's based in substance? Sorry, I'm getting very frustrated because I can hear some of the students in my class, and I'm arguing with them virtually with you. So I'll stop that. Does anybody have an opinion about this, though, this post-truth alternative fact world we're in? I'm curious.
That's an open question from Dr. Eaton. Dr. Hrinko does have his hand up,
Yeah,
but it may not be for that topic. It may not be for that topic, but I invite Chris to speak.
Let's hear it, Chris.
So I do have a view, but I actually I want to honor the format and hear your view. And given that this is Peace Studies lecture, I'm really interested in this idea. Even as part of your answer, you referenced you can say that the moon is made of green cheese, but it's not, because you can go and observe, etc. So I'm interested in the idea of ecology, ecological limits as a check on this post-truth society. And I'd love to hear about that from your perspective on religion and ecology, or eco-theology, but also how it relates to your new field of, we'll say for today, peace and conflict studies, given the venue. if that's I'd love to hear what you have to say.
So I'll start with the last part first. So all of these efforts of Earth Charter, ecological democracy, ecological civilizations, the Declaration, the Cochabamba Declaration, these all have peace and democracy at their heart, right? So there isn't a world of peace without ecological integrity. It's not possible. So we know that as environmental stress continues to increase, so do conflicts. So there's a direct relationship between environmental stress and the potential for actual conflicts. So, and we know that water shortages, food insecurity, soil erosion, deforestation, biodiversity loss, these are the ecological social stressors of the future. And so I'm not sure what you mean by ecological limits, but the Earth, if we talk about climate change, Bill McKibben constantly reminds us we are so close to tipping points, and what tipping points will do ecologically, it's really unclear. It's climate instability. So when we talk about peace, if we don't talk about peace and ecology together, then I don't think we make sense anymore. So I teach in a Peace and Conflict Studies department, and we have to talk about ecological integrity, but no one does. I mean, I'm the only one that does, but people don't. And yet they're so wedded to each other, this idea of, the reality of ecological stability and peaceful societies. So I don't know if that gets at one element. I'm not sure what you mean by ecological limit. Can you tell me what you mean by that term?
Well, I was just thinking in terms of some of these narratives are going to bump up against reality, that they're not just social constructions.
Which narratives? What narratives? What do you mean?
Well, post-truth narratives.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And they're already doing it. So, ecological integrity or ecological stability is not the highest value in post-industrial societies. It's still ecological extraction. And that Doug Ford, oh no, you're not in Ontario. Lucky all of you. Doug Ford just announced today of more mining. And you just think, okay, so we have to live in a relationship with the natural world, but we have to live in a relationship within the rhythms and limits of the natural world. And that is the problem of the anthropocentric framework, is that we don't see the ecological limits. We don't believe them, we don't know them, we don't have ecological literacy. And so people live as if the natural world is a set of resources for our benefit. And Earth community, it might sound like a romantic idea, but it's a very scientific fact. We cannot live without a healthy planet. We will not be all right. So when I was reading the Thomas Berry quotes about a diminished earth is a diminished spirituality, that's true, but it's also a diminished nourishment, diminished awareness. So there's some kind of realistic, pragmatic reality that escapes anthropocentric frameworks. And in my view, anthropocentrism has to be confronted hard and straight on. And yes, these are narratives that will not coexist peacefully. They will not. I'm sure many of you write about capitalism and the problem of capitalism, anthropocentrism, and all of these things. They're really cultural problems. But if we don't start talking the talk of ecological integrity, I think that's why Laudato Si Laudato Si has been extremely well received, not always by Catholics, but it's been extremely well received in the world, partially because it's a call to ecological integrity, and it's a call to peace, and it's a call to collaboration and cooperation across communities. It's very important. I don't know if that got at what you wanted, Chris.
So there are actually two questions, one by Darlene O'Leary, and I see, Peter, that you have your hand up as well. So maybe, and I see actually Darlene's questions generated responses and conversation as well from Jim Melville. So maybe you can ask the question and then just see how you deal with it, Heather, and maybe move on to Peter afterwards. So the question is thanks you, and then says Robin Wall Kimmerer has talked about how we can name numerous corporate logos but cannot name the plants and species that live among us. Where do you suggest we start with earth literacy? Can you talk more about how all that connects with spiritual discipline?
I mean, I don't have a magic answer to that. Earth literacy has to be. I have a daughter who's 25. She's gone right through the education system to her MA, and she doesn't know anything about earth literacy because it's not taught. Science isn't taught with any depth and with any. She was taught about recycling, reuse, recycle, whatever the third one is, but not that if whatever you put down the drain in the sink, you're actually going to drink later. So, that's basic ecological literacy, is that if we pollute the planet, we pollute our bodies. And I mean, ecological literacy in the post-industrial world is really lacking. And it's a good point, Darlene, that people know corporate logos and they don't know the plants in their neighborhood, and they don't know how to purify water, and they don't know that, if you put bleach down the sink, you're just going to drink it later. I don't have a good answer for you of how to fix that. It's very shocking to me. And I also think, the assault on evolution, I'll take the University of Ottawa, for example, the assault on evolution by right-wing Christians made it that they took evolution out of the earth science curriculum. And like, seriously? To me, that's scandalous. That is absolutely scandalous. So yeah, I don't have an answer. I see the problem, but I don't have an answer. But it is shocking, the lack of ecological literacy. And somebody on CBC radio recently said, they were talking about the demise of the family farm, which is of course an issue in the prairies. And the commentator said, yes, but for all of those, that only is a problem for those who rely on the earth for food. And I thought, where do you get your food? Where do you think food comes from, for example? So I think the lack of ecological literacy is quite widespread. I don't have a great solution except to plug away at it all the time. Sorry.
So maybe we could get a Peter's question, and then perhaps think about closing with Hilda's question in the Q&A.
Thanks, Adam. Dr. Eaton, that was wonderful to hear. And I would suggest, since I've been working on this kind of a problem for most of my academic life, the phrase that I've come to use is ecological justice.
Sure.
And it seems to be more of an umbrella term that allows us to put all of these things we've been talking about underneath it, and yet allows for, again, a new word, the intersectionality of all of these things. Because what we're seeing is a variety of narratives emerging in protest and against the master narratives of anthropocentrism and patriarchy and colonization and racism, and make a long list of these things, but they're separate. And that's one of the problems, is that we are not pulling together as we need to. And I just haven't read it. I'm just sitting on my desk, but The Intersectional Environmentalist by Leah Thomas just came out a week or so ago. And I think that really is an indication of how we can find allies, not just within the Christian tradition, but outside of it and in secular society. So I really appreciate the things that you've been saying. And I wonder how we might move forward from this, given the urgency of our situation, because the IPCC report is saying we essentially have less than 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's not like we have a generation. We used to sort of reassure ourselves. We have 5 years. So yeah. I have a son who's 25, and the same framework. He wants to go into medicine and he's a biochemist. But what do I say to him with 5 years left? What do you do with your life? How do you spend your time? And what should we be doing as a church?
So a report on the state of the planet came out just as the war in Ukraine began, and it got almost no coverage, but it was one of the most dire reports that has ever been released publicly about the state of the planet. There's a difficulty with people can't take any more catastrophic news. I think that's one of the reasons that my interest in understanding how wonder works, how does it work? How does it transform us? How does it bring new energies and insight? Because there's a fatigue of disaster data. So that's one issue. Second, I'm not entirely a fan of eco-justice being the umbrella framework, because two reasons. One is that I don't think everything is an issue of ethics. I think when ethics becomes the only central rallying point, part of the whole spectrum of eco-justice work, and I know it very well, a lot of it is very anthropocentric. And there are justice issues, ecological justice issues, or environmental racism, environmental justice issues. They're for sure very active. And they're very pressing and they're very difficult. But I think there's more than justice at stake here. I think so I personally have done a great deal of work in ethics, but shifted more to this area because I think this area has deeper energies to bring forward for work in justice and for other work. And churches, what should churches do? Well, get on board. But, I have been doing this for a long time. And, 40 years, I shouldn't admit that publicly, but quite a long time. And, the Christian tradition, according to Lynn White, was initially criticized for it being responsible for ecological devastation. But the work of the reformation of Christianity to a more ecological focus has been quite remarkable. It's not all perfect, it's not all great, but it is everywhere in the world that eco-theology or rituals, they are taking place all over the world. The whole Earth Bible studies has gone through, most of Scripture to see what are the ecological themes. Systematics, ethics, liberation theology, Boff's work on Cry the Earth, Cry the Poor, there's been a huge transformation throughout elements of the Christian tradition. The question I ask is, where is the leverage, the social leverage of Christian traditions in the society? So the inner transformation is happening, but does it have an impact? And I think that's the place to really consider, where do we have impact? Where does theology have impact? Where do churches have impact? And I think the initiative of the United Nations of Faith for the Earth is trying to be this. We have to work multi-religiously. There's no way forward anymore without working multi-religiously and working with scientists and working with climate scientists. We have to work, we have to be much more open to collaborating across traditions and develop allies. So I think science is allies, multi-religion is allies. Yeah. Sorry, Dr. Mueller.
Oh, I'm sorry. I realize that going in and out is not perhaps the best way to do the questions, but I did want to just show up for Hilda Koster's question in the Q&A. Oh, yeah. Partly because I think it actually emerges from Peter's question, your response to Peter's question. And I think it's a very large question or a couple questions, but it sort of pulls your talk into the widest possible frame, which is maybe a decent place to end actually with thoughts about what's next. So Hilda Koster thanks you for the lecture and says that you're so right to connect the ability for wonder with ethics. The question is about the connection you see between wonder and the ability to attend to the wounds of this world, wounds inflicted by human abuse. Relatedly, I'm curious whether, or Hilda's curious whether whether in your view there's a role for Christian symbols such as the cross.
So the starting point was also the connection between wonder and ethics, which I didn't do directly, but was implicit throughout my presentation and my work, that these wonder informs ethics for sure. So I think there's an indirect connection between wonder and attending to the wounds of the peoples in the natural world, is that what people experience to be sacred, they will not destroy. So I think we are aware that most people's relationship with the natural world is severed. Most people don't have an in-depth relationship with the natural world, either with literacy or with wonder. So that needs to be strengthened. And I think if any of you remember way back when it was, I forget the image, but it was the planet Earth, and it was surrounded by people of all different races and ethnicities and cultures, and it was, well, we are one family. And then that got replaced with we are one planet. So somehow the recognition of that we are all part of this Earth community, to me, expands our sense of responsibility and expands our sense of attending to the wounds, which are many. If we don't see ourselves as belonging together to the same reality, why would we attend to the wounds outside of our domain? So to me, if we can have an expanded understanding of the common good, so the social common good, the ecological common good, to me, that brings with it a natural sense of responsibility and response to the wounds. So to me, I see those. I can't prove that connection works, but I think that connection is work, as long as we don't see experiences of wonder as peak experiences for my own well-being. And they're not. They open our horizon. They make us more responsive. And the Christian symbols, much work has been done. And Chris this morning did some work on Christologies of how do we reimagine, expand, revamp symbolism so that it contains more. So symbols by definition are expansive. And if they're operating, meaning they're functional, they have symbolic power and presence, symbols are, to me, a very powerful way to transform awareness. So, for some people it's Christology, for some people it's the cross, for some people it's the resurrection, for some people it's the Spirit, it's the Trinity. So there isn't a right way to work with Christian symbolism. But I do think that the critique of Christian symbolisms, are they anthropocentric? Are they promoting anthropocentric? Or are they promoting an otherworldly next reality to the degree that it inhibits us from attending to this world and this reality? Those, to me, are critiques to bring to bear on Christian symbols that are worth our time.
So as I said, I think that's actually a wonderful place to bring today's lecture to a close. I think the emphasis on expansion and your injunction, actually, Dr. Eaton, to think more about the ways that we can go about contributing to the community that includes the natural world, which is just genuinely very profound. Judging from the comments you received and the questions you received, I think your remarks and your thoughts have resonated with everyone here today. Accordingly, I'd like to thank you very, very much for being here, for sharing your wisdom with us, for encouraging us and reminding us of the importance of nature. So without further ado, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Once more, thank the Morrow Institute and St. Paul's College for hosting this event, and my best wishes to everybody here, not just for today, but for the rest of the conference and whatever else is coming your way. So thank you, Dr. Eaton, very much appreciated.
And thank you all. I very much appreciate being involved. So thanks to all the organizers. Daniel just showed up briefly, so thanks to the organizers, and thanks for we all have to work together on these issues.